Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Toss here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Georgia is at a turning point as Mikheil Kavelashvili takes office amid deep political divisions and widespread public frustration. While the first wave of protests against the ruling Georgian Dream party have somewhat subsided, questions remain about the nation's democratic path and its EU aspirations. With discontent brewing, many are asking if Georgians are losing hope or merely regrouping for the next chapter. Joining us today on TVP World to provide insight is George Melashvili, founder and president of the Europe-Georgia Institute. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning, Benjamin. Thank you for the invitation.
So we are receiving a little bit of mixed message here when it comes to these protests. I'm hoping that you can help us understand the situation on the ground here because, well, some reports are coming in saying that the protests are still growing strong, but our own correspondent on the ground are saying that it has somewhat subsided, at least in terms of intensity. What's the actual situation there on the ground?
Well, in terms of intensity, maybe your correspondent was referring to the number of people who were attending the protest yesterday. In that case, it was relatively lower than in the past 10, 15 days. However, the protest has been going on for 15 consecutive days. It means that the people are tired. The weather in Tbilisi is sunny today, but it has been freezing cold in the last days, and the people decided to regroup a little bit. However, even though the number at Rustaveli Avenue might be a little bit smaller than before, we are witnessing lots of grassroots protests all across the city. Today in the morning, for example, we have approximately 10 different protests scheduled at different locations. So it is definitely a regrouping. It is a different strategy, different tactics if you want. And it is definitely nobody is conceding to what has happened. Nobody is dropping our willingness to keep the fight for Georgia's European and democratic future. It is just changing, which is expected. It has always been understood by the people of Georgia that this is a very long fight, the fight that needs to be taken very carefully to avoid any possible tragic developments. And that's exactly what the protesters are doing. They're protesting very responsibly, very peacefully, and this peaceful protest is already demonstrating some results, at least in the terms of consolidation of Georgian public. Even though we've been witnessing these unprecedented protests, the support that was expected by the Georgian public from our Western allies has unfortunately not been enough. The calls for sanctions, the calls for additional pressure on the leaders of the Georgian Dream responsible for mass election fraud, responsible for the falsifications, responsible for brutal, violent dispersal of protesters have not been implemented yet. So these sanctions is something anticipated, expected, and something that we have not yet seen. Today, the European Council on Foreign Affairs is gathering. It will probably be a very good chance for the European Union to finally demonstrate some leadership on this matter and to actually support the people of Georgia, not by words, but by actions.
Right, like I mentioned, a lot of the demands of these protesters have yet to be met, and the appointment of the new president, Mikheil Kavelashvili, seems to have added gasoline to the fire. Can you help us understand why this appointment has injected more energy into the protests? What does this mean for Georgia's political trajectory?
Well, there are actually only three main demands from the protesters. First of all, the new election, which should be implemented by a neutral administration, not the GD-affiliated Central Election Commission that has done a terrible job at holding this election. And the second demand is release of all political prisoners. So these three demands is actually something that we have, and that's exactly what the protesters are demanding from the Georgian Dream. The way out of this crisis is a new election, an election that will have trust in it by the Georgian public. Unfortunately, this is not happening now. Regarding the ability of the Georgian public to achieve it, and regarding the question of Kavelashvili, that's not the most important issue even. If we are considering the Parliament of Georgia as illegitimate, which the President of Georgia has stated multiple times, in that case, this election It does not have any legal basis, and this person whom you're seeing on the screen, he does not have any actual ability to rule the country. It is a very symbolic gesture, a gesture which is very upsetting to the Georgian public, first and foremost, because this person is totally incompetent, he's unfit for this office. And the reason why the oligarch appointed him is exactly to punish the Georgian public, who has constantly demonstrated its loyalty to the European values. While Kavelashvili, he represents a specific political flank of the Georgian Dream, which has always been openly anti-Western. If some members of the Georgian Dream are trying to be anti-Western while not demonstrating it, he's representing exactly the most anti-Western, and I would even say anti-Georgian flank of this political party. So obviously, the reaction from the society has been utterly negative. Even the supporters of the Georgian Dream Party, even those people, consider him unfit. And that's also demonstrating a very clear attitude.
All right, attitude is a very, I think, indicative word that you mentioned here. Do you think that Kavelashvili actually has any influence on policy in any meaningful ways? Or, like you mentioned, perhaps this is just more like a slap to the protesters and those who are against the Georgian Dream, and just letting them know, basically, we can do whatever we want?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of a background of his political party, because originally, Georgian Dream wanted to create a satellite opposition political party which would be ultra-nationalist, ultra-alt-right, ultra-anti-Western. This political party was such a failure that they would not be able to crumble over the 5% barrier in Georgian parliament. So Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili, he decided to reintegrate them back into the Georgian Dream, and now he is trying to promote the leadership of this political wing. So he's specifically sending a very clear message to the West by appointing this person. Obviously, neither Kavelashvili nor anybody within Georgian Dream has any political weight. All these people are there to serve the oligarch, and they are simply conductors, conduits of his political will.
And you mentioned earlier that even some people from the Georgian Dream Party are questioning this decision. Do you think we're going to see further resignation from the Georgian Dream Party, or do you think that the party is actually consolidating power by appointing loyalists?
The Georgian Dream is not a classical political party. It's not based on meritocracy. It's not based on any, political figures. There is no political figure within the Georgian Dream Party. All of those people, they owe their political positions, their leadership positions to Bidzina Ivanishvili, and they know very well that the moment they step aside, they will be eliminated in political terms. So they don't want to lose their privileges, they don't want to lose their positions, and they will be just conducting whatever the party leader orders them to do. Plus, Ivanishvili is implementing a very coherent propaganda tactic. He's trying to delay consequences, both for him and for the members of his political party. And he's trying to gaslight the Georgian public that on the 20th of January, new administration in the United States will be inaugurated and everything will be fine. He will be able to strike a deal with Donald Trump and so on and so forth. So he's trying to gaslight the Georgian public, and also he's trying to keep the loyalty of his supporters and also of big businesses in Georgia.
And how effective do you think that tactic is going to be, the one that you mentioned as a very coherent propaganda tactic? Are people buying it, or do you think that these widespread protests are an indication of perhaps people not really being sold on this rhetoric?
Well, we definitely know the Georgian Dream has invested millions into propaganda, specifically anti-Western kind of propaganda. They have been trying to decrease public demand of the EU, of NATO, and they have been trying to do it for a very, very long time. They failed. That's why during the October election, we witnessed the change of the party logo, that they used European stars instead of the party logo. So obviously, this propaganda is not very well working to decrease public demand of the European Union and of NATO. However, on the other hand, the propaganda has a very strong grip on internal politics. The Georgian Dream has been demonizing opposition parties, civil society, literally anybody who thinks differently than they do. And this propaganda, unfortunately, has been much more powerful because there is a huge media imbalance in Georgia. The government-controlled TV channels, Imedi, public broadcaster, the others, they are dominating the media, unfortunately, because they have unlimited financial resources and they're able to provide the public with very well-designed, well-tailored propaganda that has been used by the Georgian Dream for already a very long period of time. So yes, we're seeing indications that there are cracks in this propaganda, and one of the reasons why so many people are still in the streets is exactly because of these cracks. But on the other hand, they're still gaslighting the public that somehow Georgia will join the European Union in 2030, that the Prime Minister's statement was misunderstood, and that eventually everything is fine. This line, that everything is fine, that the normalcy is still apprehended, is probably the most coherent line that Georgian propaganda is trying to sell.
Right, so we will have to see how the situation develops, but it does seem like it is quite dire over there in Georgia. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's always a pleasure.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.